That poem goes on about beauty, how beauty had no figure. Why? Because without generation and decay, there is no beauty. Here is how the poem continues. Beauty had no figure, no sacred symmetry, centripetal, slowly opening to a half-glimpsed nuclear core, hot enough to melt the Arctic, ice-bound heart of God. One flower in Eden, and they would have known beauty, and knowing that, would know how beauty fades. To this testament of beauty's evanescence, we could add another one, that of Wallace Stevens, who was a quintessential post-lapsarian poet, wrote a famous poem called Sunday Morning. This poem takes us inside the mind of a young woman who is in her garden, very earthly garden, might add. Takes us into her mind as she meditates on matters of life and death, transcendence, and she clearly is feeling the pathos of nature's beauty, not only in the world around that surrounds her, but also in her mortal, yet at the same time seminal body. So during these silent meditations, she asks herself, I quote, "Is there no change of death in paradise? Does ripe fruit never fall? Or do the boughs hang always heavy in that perfect sky, unchanging, yet so like our perishing earth, with rivers like our own, that seek for seas they never find, the same receding shores that never touch with inarticulate pang? Why set the pear upon the river banks, or spice the shores with odors of the plum? Alas, that they should wear our colors there, the silken weavings of our afternoons, and pick the strings of our insipid lutes. Death is the mother of beauty, mystical, within whose burning bosom we devise our earthly mothers, waiting sleeplessly." If we want to attribute a deeper motive to the ancient Eve when she ate of the pomegranate, it was no doubt a burning desire to become an earthly mother of this sort. It was to make the fruit real. That was the underlying urge. The latter-day Eve in Stevens' poem, who sits in a sunny chair listening to the green freedom of a cockatoo, that woman is content to watch the spring unfold with its wakened birds that, quote, test the reality of misty fields before they move on elsewhere. To test reality is a distinctly terrestrial imperative. But at a certain point, the woman says to herself, "But in contentment I still feel the need of some imperishable bliss. I still feel the need of some imperishable bliss." And I don't want to suggest that feeling the need for that imperishable bliss is something that is in any way fatuous. I think that it's very difficult to be human and not have such a nostalgia. And let's forget that if we are all descendants of Eve, we're bound to feel that, because unlike Adam, Eve was created in Eden. She has a paradisiac origin. And through her, maybe, we have all inherited a kind of native nostalgia for some imperishable bliss. But if that bliss were ever to be granted to us, were we ever to experience it, we would lose at once both the bliss and the need for it. That's the cruel, tragic paradox of the human condition. It's perishability that turns bliss into beauty, and vice versa. Quoting from Stevens again, "Death is the mother of beauty, hence from her alone shall come fulfillment to our dreams and our desires." Without death, there is no fulfillment, no ever-changing moods of the phenomenal world. Death may, quote, "strew the leaves of sure obliteration on our paths, yet she makes the willows shiver in the sun for maidens who were wont to sit and gaze upon the grass." Conclusion, at least my conclusion. Death is neither the negation nor the termination of life. It's the generative source of nature's ceaseless movement into form. Passions of rain or moods in falling snow, grievings in loneliness, or unsubdued elations when the forest blooms, gusty emotions on wet roads on autumn nights, all pleasures and all pains, remembering the bough of summer and the winter branch. These are the measures destined for her soul. Appearances owe their poignancy, their almost unbearable beauty and power of, what would I call it, evocation. They owe that to the time-bound mortality that attunes us to the fleeting moods of nature. This kind of attunement was not possible in Eden. Why? Because its garden was essentially moodless, precisely because its environment was not mortalized. Precisely because human care, which imbues nature with its pathos, had no place there. You take human care out of the equation, and nature's appearances become sterile. Nature blossoms forth in a tapestry of soul-penetrating appearances only where care enters into the picture, giving the visible world the power to intimate rather than merely indicate. What do I mean by that? I mean the difference between being in nature or in a scene of nature as opposed to those nature scenes that you'll see sometimes along the walls of airport terminals. That's indication, not intimation. Where the phenomenon does not rise up from recessive depths, there is no appearance as such, but only a static and reified image. It's a difference between the image and appearance. And an appearance is dynamic. It arises from some source. And where there is no appearance, there are no moods. And where there are no moods, there's no attunement. So one could say that in Eden, Adam and Eve were in some sense blind to the world. In a single instant, Eve changed that, and suddenly she became all eyes. It was as if Eve, in tasting the fruit, ate of the seed of death from which human vision is born, sort of vision that Stephen's young woman possesses. I'm going to quote another short poem by Eleanor Wilner now. It's called "The Apple Was a Northern Invention." In this poem, she describes the moment of the opening of the human eye. When she ate the pomegranate, and this is Eve, when she ate the pomegranate, it was as if every seed with its wet, red, shining coat of sweet flesh, clinging to the dark core, was one of nature's eyes. Afterward, it was nature that was blind, and she who was wild with vision, condemned to see what was before her and behind. Here, too, we should trust Wilner, I think, that the fruit was a pomegranate, not an apple. The pomegranate is the fruit of Persephone. Who was Persephone? The daughter of Demeter. She's the one who has to descend into the underworld to rejoin her husband Pluto, the king of the underworld, every autumn, where she spends 6 months a year in that underworld, taking with her the seeds of the pomegranate, and it's in the springtime that she's allowed to return to her mother. Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, by the way. As time in its past and future recesses is opened up, the wonder of things is disclosed to human eyes. And that's the point, isn't it? The shattering of immediacy, the fall away from our complete absorption in things, is what gives appearances these dimensions and depths, in and out of which their forms and moods shine forth in their enigma. The pomegranate, it seems, lent its eyes to this woman. And who knows, maybe it is or was the inner will of nature as a whole that operated through Eve. Maybe it was nature's inner will to hand its beauty over to human testimony, or to become visible in its phenomenal plenitude through a transfer of its eyes, that is to say, its seed, to Eve's natal vision. And if that much is true, then the famous serpent figures as what? As an ambassador of the world's desire to render its bounties manifest. That serpent tempted Eve to open her eyes, to shed her blindness, and to be reborn in a new visionary self. And to conclude, I would say that only something as bottomless and inexhaustible as human care could take proper custody of the wonders of the visible world. So if Eve became wild with vision at the moment of her rebirth, it's because it takes a wilderness of pain, death, suffering, and toil to give density, opacity, and mood to appearances. I believe that we don't ask, or should not ask, whether this price is too high to pay. We pay it regardless. But it is also the case that miracles are by their very nature priceless. That'll wrap it up. I'm Robert Harrison for Entitled Opinions, a kind of post-avian epilogue. Stay tuned for Decca. She's going to be coming up at the top of the hour. And I will see you sometime. I don't know when exactly, but sometime. Thanks for listening.